Thank you very, very much for the invitation to join this very, very important panel. I'm going to take a particular angle on poverty alleviation. That's very clear, I think, from the title. And I've got a couple of slides that I'm going to work through. Poverty alleviation as a manifestation of Marxist human rights or Chinese Marxist human rights. This is a very important angle on it, otherwise I wouldn't be talking about it, but it's something that I think more and more people will come to understand as time unfolds. I'll begin with this image and then explain it. How do Chinese Marxist human rights work? Now, put aside all of your preconceptions that come with the term human rights. You'll see that at the roots, there is anti-hegemonic sovereignty or anti-colonial sovereignty. I'll come back to that. The core of human right in China is the right to socio-economic well-being. The right to socio-economic well-being. Noticeably missing from the Western tradition of human rights. And then the leaves or the fruit are civic, political, cultural, and environmental rights. A bit more about each one. First point. Sovereignty, now you can call it sovereignty with Chinese characteristics, as one form of it is the foundation, but this particular definition of sovereignty arises from the anti-colonial struggle and is therefore shared with many, many countries that were involved in the anti-colonial struggle and achieved national liberation, especially in the 20th century, and it's predicated on mutual non-interference, or the term that's used is hegemony, that you don't seek to enact hegemony on another country, and no other country enacts hegemony on you. That's anti-colonial sovereignty. It's absolutely crucial. It's peaceful coexistence, common to countries in the non-aligned movement. There's two other dimensions that do come from a Chinese context. One actually is earlier, is the Marxist focus on material rights. These are the rights to work, the rights to food, clothing, and housing, the right to socioeconomic well-being, which is embodied actually in the right to life. Now, it's interesting that the right to life has somehow disappeared from the Western tradition with the COVID-19 pandemic, but we'll maybe come back to that. How is this particular Marxist emphasis manifested? Well, it's a technical term for this, unleashing the forces of production or liberating the forces of production and attaining well-being for all. Or as Deng Xiaoping put it, there is no such thing as poor socialism. There's also an influence here from the Chinese tradition. I've chosen two. There are many other examples. This is a very well-known saying in China: when the granaries are full, the people follow appropriate rules of conduct, and when there's enough to eat and wear, people know honor and shame. Now, this is recorded in Sima Qian's, the great historian, attributed to a statesman from the Warring States period, Guangzhong. You can see how far back it goes. It's pushing 3 millennia ago now. There's another strong dimension to this, which has become reinterpreted in a Marxist context, the Confucian desire for at least a Shaokang society. Now, Shaokang has many dimensions. It's translated as moderately well off, but it means moderately healthy, moderately peaceful, moderately stable, secure, all those sorts of things as well. So there are two elements, the Marxist and the Chinese influence on these. And you can see by now how it can be argued that this particular emphasis of human rights underlies the lifting of around 800 million people out of poverty or out of absolute poverty, but it also underlies things like the minorities, nationalities policy, the Belt and Road Initiative, and so on. Let me just go back to the image briefly, and you can see then how these relate to one another. Thus far, let's wait for, there we go. Thus far, I've emphasized that it's a particular Marxist or Chinese Marxist approach to human rights. It's not just that. It's also a distinctly global approach to human rights. And I want to draw quotations from two important UN documents. The first one is a short but very, very important document from 1960, the UN Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples. Now I've got some of this text hidden here. Now what's happened? Great. All right. Sorry. There we go. This declaration includes statements: the subjection of peoples to alien subjugation, domination, and exploitation constitutes a denial of fundamental human rights. So it clearly connects anti-colonial sovereignty with human rights. Any attempt aimed at...
And both are satisfied.
Yeah. Copy of the
अपना सही reflection है सारा. तो पांच choice of.
Go ahead, Roland.
Continue. Yes, any attempt aimed at, I can't see that text there, total disruption of the territorial, total disruption of national unity and the territorial integrity of a country is incompatible with the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Now, this is a very strong statement. It indicates that the whole sort of colonial project of interfering with or dividing or cutting up a country or dividing its borders is unacceptable as far as the UN is concerned. You can see from this document from 1960, which went through the General Assembly, was proposed by the Soviet Union and then taken up by countries in Africa and Asia, as a very strong statement. The second one I want to quote from comes from 1976. Was then enacted. It actually was developed in the 60s as well. It's the UN International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. The states parties to the present covenant recognize the right of everyone to an adequate standard of living for himself and his family, including adequate food, clothing, and housing, and to the continuous improvement of living conditions. This is the core human right to socio-economic well-being. And it's actually something, let me go back a little bit in the history of this. Both of these, the Declaration and the Covenant, were quickly signed and ratified by nearly all of the developing countries in the world. And it should be no surprise that the abstentions from the first one, the independence to colonial countries and peoples, was not voted against. Okay. It was not voted against, but the countries that abstained from it were the old colonial club, about 12 or 15 countries who now constitute the West. And the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights has a similar story behind it. So now I will quote from a work that I would recommend if you want to pursue this further. It's Sun Ping Hua, Promotion of Human Rights in China, or Protection of Human Rights in China. It's the best work in English thus far. The history of the Communist Party of China is the history of its struggle for human rights on behalf of the Chinese people. Thank you.